So for the last 4 weeks here at Pittman Park, we've been talking about discipleship, and I've been excited to hear from some of you about how you are becoming more intentional about your commitment to follow Jesus, your spiritual growth, and being a disciple who makes disciples. This week, a member of our congregation who's a teacher reached out to me with a question about getting a Bible for a student in her class and perhaps a couple extras that she could keep on hand for when a student had a question about faith. What an incredible thing. I think sometimes we write off Generation Z or Generation Alpha, whichever one's in school right now, thinking they have no questions and no desire to learn more about God or to even open the Bible. And yet here is a child, a student, a teenager who is serious about having the questions of faith answered for her. This teacher didn't go on a mission trip to find someone to share her faith with or to share the gospel with. She was just going about her daily life, her daily work, planting seeds of grace and faith with the students that she has influence with. Isn't it funny how when we begin to take that commitment to being a disciple who makes disciples, that suddenly opportunities abound around us as we seek to share our faith with others. Another member of our congregation came to me this week sharing about how they decided to become more intentional about reading the Bible every day and spending time in prayer. And the result, this person said, has been refreshing and renewing for him and his life. Not only that, it's been transformational for his family, that they together are now learning and growing in the faith because they've begun to take their commitment to Jesus seriously, to not just being a member of the crowd, but to being a disciple of Jesus Christ. But even more, friends, this week I saw so many of you responding to the needs of others, going out and visiting Ed and Nancy Kreitz and Miss Betty Merck in the hospital. Your faithfulness encouraged each of these families as they walk through the valley of the shadow of death. And I know that you will continue to walk with these families, that you'll continue to stand by their side as humble servants and faithful encouragers, that we together will continue to be a church filled with disciples who build faith-filled communities that transform our community for Christ. Y'all, hearing the stories from you this week is so incredibly encouraging, not just because I'm the preacher and I like to hear good reports, but because I believe that when we participate in God's mission, that we get to see incredible things happening in our midst. I believe that if we continue to press in to becoming disciples who are committed, growing, and making other disciples, that our lives, our families, our community, and our world will be transformed by the power of God's grace. So far in our series, we've talked about 2 of the 4 characteristics of disciples at Pittman Park. We want to be faithful encouragers who consistently reflect Jesus' love to others in ways that build belonging. We want to be humble servants who generously share our lives to build up others. And today we're going to talk about how we can become compassionate leaders who walk alongside others in ways that build their capacity to honor God. So to start our time this morning, I want you to take a look with me at Matthew chapter 9. Now, while you get there, I want to tell you that Matthew chapter 9 is an absolutely packed chapter in the story of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection found in Matthew's gospel. In this chapter alone, in Matthew chapter 9 alone, Jesus will heal a paralyzed man, call Matthew to come and be his disciple, or Levi, as some of your translations may say, to come and be his disciple. He'll attend a party with Matthew, and he'll begin getting in confrontations with the Pharisees. In this chapter alone, the Pharisees and Jesus confront one another 3 different times. Jesus will teach about fasting, raise a girl from the dead, heal a sick woman. Jesus will heal 2 blind men and cast a demon out of a man so that he can speak again. Matthew 9 is action-packed, friends. Jesus is carrying out his ministry nonstop, and the crowds of people who were gathering around to see these miracles that Jesus was performing, these healings, and to hear the teachings, they began to say, "We've never seen anything like this in Israel. Nothing like this has ever been seen in this place." Because indeed, nothing like it has ever been seen. These people were astonished and amazed. The crowds that followed after Jesus were astonished and amazed at just what Jesus was doing. Which brings us to the closing verses of Matthew chapter 9, verses 35 to 38 to be exact, the verses you heard read this morning. I'll read them for you again. It says there that Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom and healing every disease and sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field." Now, when I hear this passage, I often highlight verse 37, where Jesus tells us that the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. I think we have this tendency to want to highlight how broken our world is and how desperate people are to hear and experience salvation, hope, purpose, and life. That truly is life. Because, friends, our world is broken and desperate. But oftentimes, when I hear sermons on this passage, what I actually hear is people saying that the world is going to hell, and we've got to tell people about it. That the world is going to hell, and we've got to tell people about it. We've got to get mad. We've got to get loud. We've got to point out sin and sinners. We've got to let them know just how evil they are, how lost they are. We got to break out the signs, the cardboard signs and the bullhorns. We got to let people know. Now, friends, there's a place for calling out sin and a place for calling out brokenness. There's a time for us to get real about how every single one of us has fallen short of the glory and the call of God on our lives. But friends, if that's all we ever do, we are missing the heart of this passage, and I would suggest to you the heart of Jesus' ministry. Take a look with me at Matthew 9:36. It says there, when he saw the crowds, when Jesus saw the crowds that were following after him, that were moving from town to town and village to village following after him, Jesus has compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. They are scattered with no direction. And what we see in this verse is that Jesus' ministry is not a ministry of conversion, friends, but it's a ministry of compassion. It's a ministry of compassion. It's compassion that drives Jesus to reach out to the least and the last and the lost, to go after the one who has wandered away from the 99. And if we are going to be disciples of Jesus, we too have to be moved by compassion. We have to be led by compassion and choose to lead with compassion whenever we have the opportunity to. But what is compassion? It's one of those words that gets thrown around in our culture a lot. Compassion, if you do a quick Google search, it tells you this, that compassion is the feeling that arises when we are confronted with another suffering and feel motivated to relieve that suffering. Compassion is not sympathy, which is thinking about someone. It's not empathy, which is thinking and feeling, because compassion involves action. We see sympathy and empathy all the time, especially in the aftermath of a tragedy. What is it that we post on social media? That should give you a clue as to the nature of sympathy and empathy. What is it that we post on social media after every act of violence, every natural disaster, or every tragedy? Thoughts and prayers. Thoughts and prayers. Thoughts and prayers. Friends, Jesus is calling us to more than just thoughts and prayers. Jesus is calling us to more than thoughts and prayers for those who are suffering. Jesus calls us to imitate him and to have compassion. He calls us to act. Jesus sees the people like sheep without a shepherd, and he has compassion on them, and he does something. It's a shame, friends, that we put the chapters and verses in the scriptures, because sometimes we miss out on how the story actually goes. You see, this story, this episode in Jesus' life that's happening in Matthew chapter 9 actually extends into chapter 10. Because the very next verse, Matthew chapter 10, verse 1, tells us that Jesus' next action is to commission his disciples and send them out to carry on the same ministry that he was doing. Why? Because Jesus sees the people lost, hurting and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. So he sends his disciples out to be compassionate leaders wherever they go, building God's kingdom all along the way, carrying on the ministry, multiplying the ministry of Jesus. So you might be asking, what is a compassionate leader? Well, a compassionate leader is one who walks alongside others in ways that build their capacity to honor God. This is what Jesus does. He pours his life into the disciples so that they can multiply his ministry in the future. He does life-on-life ministry with them. He sees them when they are suffering. He walks alongside them. He laughs when they are laughing. He corrects when they step out of line, because he cares that his disciples understand that leadership is not about position, but that leadership in the kingdom is about the care for others. Simon Sinek puts that notion this way. He says that compassionate leadership is focused less on being in charge and more on taking care of those who are in your charge. Compassionate leadership is not about a position, but about caring for those who are around you. Compassionate leaders, they use their heads and hearts to inspire and to influence people so that they can, in turn, inspire and influence others. Compassionate leaders use their influence to positively impact others and the whole world. They use their influence, wherever they are, to build God's kingdom in that place. Jesus would say that compassionate leaders are leaven for the bread. The South Georgia translation of that says that we are the salt for the grits, right? Compassionate leaders transform the places where they go because they see the people all around them. They care for them, and they work for their good. They recognize people's deep longings, their suffering, and they act to bring healing and hope. Y'all, we don't have to look very far to see suffering in our community. Everywhere we look, we see people who are living without hope. Even in our homes, even in our workplaces, we see people who are living without purpose. We see people who are lost and alone. We see people who are crushed by the decisions they've made and who are also crushed by forces beyond their control. We see people who struggle in silence, fighting battles that we may never know. But friends, God doesn't call us to sit back and shake our heads when we look at the world and say, what a shame, what a shame. No. Jesus calls us to see the people, to be filled with compassion, and then to act to bring healing, purpose, hope, and new life where there once was brokenness. Jesus calls us to be the workers for the field, to bring in the harvest, to call people into a relationship with him. And by first deepening our relationship with them, by seeing the people, hearing their stories, and working to bring healing. About 15 years ago, I had the opportunity to go to Passion. It's a college gathering that happens every year in Atlanta. They're at the Georgia Dome or Phillips Arena. They have about 50,000 students who come together, college students, for worship. And this was a movement that had grown and grown and grown. It started way back when I was in college in the early 2000s, which doesn't quite feel like 20 years ago, but certainly is. And around the early 2000s, middle 2000s, the leaders of Passion, Louis Giglio and others, began to look around and see that even though they had 50,000 college students in an arena worshiping God together, that things weren't actually changing outside the walls of the arena. They noticed that year after year they would walk past the same people in the same situations. So they began to ask questions about what the people that they passed on the street each year needed. They talked to Union Mission and other groups in and around Atlanta who were doing poverty rights work. Came to find out that what the people that they passed on the side of the streets each year at Passion, what they needed most was a pair of socks and a clean towel. That would bring the most benefit and make the most change. So the next year, they started a new program called Do Something Now. So when you got your ticket as a college student to go to Passion, they said, we want you to do one more thing. You've paid for your ticket to be a part of this incredible gathering with music and teaching. We want you to do one more thing, and that is to buy a towel and a pack of socks and bring them with you this year. Friends, I wish you could have seen the towers of socks that were brought into that arena. I wish you could have seen the mountains of towels. Well, you might have seen a mountain of towels if you've ever been in your laundry room before. Maybe that's just my laundry room. The mountains of towels that were brought in. Because Louis Giglio and others who were leading the movement knew that what God has given us in spaces like this isn't meant to only change us here. It's meant to change the world. It's meant to spill out into the streets, into the highways and the byways. And often that's not on the other side of the world, but literally just outside the doors. Which makes me wonder, have we seen the people who are around us? Do we know what their actual needs are? Are we seeking to be compassionate towards them and to walk with them through the struggles that life has brought them? Are we compassionate leaders here at Pittman Park? That question leads me to two other questions that can help us grow as compassionate leaders. Perhaps to open our eyes to the opportunities that are all around us to live as Jesus' disciples in the world. The first question is this: who has God put in my path to mentor? Who has God put in my path? Who is it that I see day after day, week after week, month after month, that I see every day, that I have the unique opportunity and relationship with, that I can speak into their life, words of hope and purpose and meaning? Who is it that I can walk alongside in moments of trial and pain so that they can know the abiding presence of God? Who is it that's in my life right now that I can draw near to encourage and serve? The second question is this: how can you care for those in your community? And I don't mean Statesboro. Look closer. Who is it that you can impact in your home today? Who is it that you can impact at your work tomorrow? Who is it that you know right now who needs an encouraging word, who needs a helping hand, who needs someone to remind them of God's presence and grace. How can you care for them? The 12 who were commissioned by Jesus in Matthew chapter 10, verse 1, went on to begin a ministry that has literally transformed the face of the earth. A ministry that we are a part of, friends. So may we too see the need around us and be moved with compassion to be a part of the transformation of the world. Amen.